Welcome to the Courage Coaching and Counseling Podcast. And today's guest is Lauren Wilson with Speak Out Portland. And I'm excited to have Lauren here with us today. Thank you for coming on, Lauren.
Oh man, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
I connected with Lauren through Instagram. She's been sharing on her channel lots of encouraging uh, uh, posts and videos. And I'm excited to learn more about her nonprofit. Um, and she's raising mental health awareness and supporting folks with mental health uh, locally and nationally. So, as we dive into that, can you share, Lauren, your background and how did mental health advocacy like become a passion for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it actually starts kind of back in high school for me. So over 10 years ago, just struggled a lot with my own personal journey with mental illness. And sharing my story, I often kind of share about the classic trifecta of a teen girl of just like an eating disorder and self-harm and suicidal ideation and how they all kind of affected me together and separately. And at the same time was on leadership in a church. And so there quickly became this like clash of serving in a church capacity and like loving Jesus so much, and then having this struggle like internally about my identity and my mental health. And through years of experiencing both really positive responses from the church and then also harmful responses from the church,
Mm-hmm.
started to create kind of my own working theory of how mental illness and ourselves holistically as Jesus followers need to be responding to mental illness. Fast forward several years, and you can find a lot of this story on my Instagram page and then my own podcast, but was healed from bipolar, struggled with bipolar for 6 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about this on that podcast or in this podcast today, but um, yeah, I just have done a lot of work myself. I've been in therapy for years, and now am realizing like, man, this is such a passion of mine of changing the narrative for others coming up through the church now. Mainly that's young adults and teens,
Yeah.
um, wrestling with the same thing of, man, I struggle with this like mental illness. And is that because of a lack of faith, or is that because of, I've heard it so many times, like there's sin in your life. And so you're struggling with mental illness because of sin.
Mm-hmm.
And so just would love to start to push back against that narrative of like what is the actual theology in the Bible about mental illness and our identity and how we as Jesus followers get to operate um, in the world and in the church.
Yeah,
So
that's so huge. When you were in leadership, Lauren, um, were you sharing and kind of transparent about your struggle, or did you have to kind of compartmentalize or hide that from folks?
yeah, it's a great question. There are seasons of kind of both. I think the one I remember the most was in high school and youth group. Lead like leaders in our church actively asking me to be on leadership. If you know much about the Enneagram, I'm an 8, and so I naturally just can
Mm,
take charge of things. I like challenging things. I like to have a voice in kind of these justice areas, and so at the beginning, it was a lot of like, "Hey, we want you to come help lead these things. Hey, we value your opinion and your voice." And my response was always like, "I don't know if I'm ready.
mm,
I personally feel like I'm drowning. Like I appreciate you asking, but I'm not sure if that's A, healthy for me, and B, healthy for people that are listening. I don't know if that's a great example." Um and their response is always like, "Man, your honesty is what we want in leadership. We want
mm,
someone with that voice sharing." Again, I'm not sure how how I feel about that in hindsight. And I think I wish I would have received more just like guidance in like, hey, we want you to lead, but we also want you to be in a place of actively healing this part of your life.
Yeah.
Um, and
They
then later on in,
that for a lot of folks, even when we're healthy, leadership roles, like we never feel ready. Um,
totally, yeah.
but to maybe maybe they could have listened better with like helping you feel more healthy. Um,
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think it was almost a cry for help of me sharing, like,
Mm,
but I'm struggling with this eating disorder. I'm struggling with it, like, this self-harm, and I know that this isn't healthy. Um, and it's not like a, because the gospel is not fix your stuff and then come to Jesus, right? It's like come to Jesus as you are, full
right.
transparency.
Absolutely.
Um, but I think as a young adult, I just needed an adult figure to see me where I was at.
Mm,
Um, and I think that that's where that disconnect happened, was like I realized that I need help and I'm trying to ask for help, and you're just seeing this like great story or this great like potential um
mm,
like transformation story of like she came from this to this,
yeah.
rather than meeting me on that space of like of healing, um which can't
I want to pause there because like just you saying that is it's like so true. Um, for for people who are being like honest and vulnerable with their struggles, they I don't know, maybe it's a little unfair, but sometimes we want to use people uh, because it's a great story.
yeah.
Um, um yeah. Um,
Which
yeah.
which is, there's nothing wrong in that
Mm,
if we also are talking about the steps. We're also talking about, we're not just celebrating the end. Um, we're talking about like, but this was really hard work. So like if you zoom out on my story,
mm,
I always share I've experienced a lot of healings, but really the most impactful one for myself was that I got to a place where I was so suicidal. I was actively trying to commit suicide a couple times a week, and I finally got to
oh,
a an inpatient program, and
mm,
it was at that place of, like, complete and utter helplessness that
mm,
I was met with, like, the right medication and the right, professionals, and then the right tools. Like, I left that facility, knowing how to eat healthy, and again, through therapy we talked about these things for the whole time, but I needed that reset of, I know what it means to eat healthy and to have a healthy gut. I know what it means to like have a sleep schedule that my brain um, can actually rest and respond and restore itself from. I know what
mm,
healthy relationships look like, and that I have to have community to call out the lies that I'm believing, and the right medication and the right professionals. And that was the first healing of being healed from bipolar that I experienced. And it's that work that we talk about at Speak Out. As Jesus followers, we will always, everyone will experience healing one day, but that's not necessarily on this earth. Some of us will experience full healing once we get to heaven. And
mm,
and there's that responsibility of caring for your mental illness. Um, and it's hard work. And then the
yeah.
second 3 months later was supernaturally healed from bipolar. And again, that's nothing I did. That was Jesus just choosing to heal me. And for the
Mm,
last 6 years, I've been off medication with zero symptoms of bipolar. But I think going back to my story in the church, everyone wants to focus on that supernatural healing, when
mm,
I think the like really the healing to celebrate is the hard work of knowing your body and listening and choosing this life that's healthy for you, which is not a popular one.
yeah. Yeah. The can you share a little bit more, Lauren, about bipolar disorder? Because some
Yeah,
listeners they might like I think I kind of know what that means, uh, but it manifests itself in different ways. So, like,
totally.
could you give like a general description of it, and then like what was it like for you,
Yeah.
your experiences?
So bipolar is it's a mood disorder. Um, there's seasons of mania and there's seasons of depression. For myself, I was um, interesting. I think I would have been diagnosed as more of an extreme bipolar if I had not been able to decipher seeing spiritual warfare and psychosis. I experienced a ton of like seeing into the spiritual realm,
Mm,
um, and so they diagnosed me as, I mean, without getting too nitty gritty into the psychology of it, there's like
mhm,
two levels of bipolar. One that and the kind of main difference is like seeing and hearing voices, and then mood disorder with all of it. And the lesser is like just a mood disorder, affects the way your brain operates. The easiest way to describe it, I had rapid cycles, so I within a given day would experience mania and depression within about 24 hours, sometimes back and forth. Um,
mm,
and what it felt like really was when I was manic, felt like you took, like, think of the nicest car that you can think of, and you just drove it straight up, like straight up a hill, full throttle. And it, over time, if you just keep doing that, it's going to blow the engine. It's not made for that. Um,
mm.
and by the time I ended my manic cycle, I needed to be kind of go to the repair shop, right? Go to a mechanic shop. And so then I needed time for my brain to heal itself. Um,
Mm. So you would just
and
shut down.
I would just completely shut down, and it would go from like a really high high to a really low low. And
Mm,
at that place of dropping to a low low, I was immediately suicidal, like immediately. And it just took then days to like get to a place of feeling quote unquote normal again.
mm. So
And so,
so in a week, you are getting to those low points of suicidal thoughts.
sometimes
Not like within weeks or like seasonally or
no,
monthly. Yeah.
no, sometimes it was even within days. So, which is really, really exhausting. It was really confusing for friends.
Mm,
Um, and my medication, I like to describe it as almost like buffers. So if my high point was here and my low point was here, then my medication kind of just pushed those a little bit closer to this line of um, normalcy.
but not as extreme, but
So
still
it just, yeah. So
still
it's still,
going up and down.
so I still would experience mania. I was in college at the time, and a manic brain essentially is kind of on fire. Your brain works about 10 times faster than a quote unquote healthy brain would. And so, which
Mm,
is the burning up of your frontal cortex, right? Um, and so at that point, would just get so distracted in classes and at college because I was picking things up like that because my brain
mm,
was just working so quickly. Um, and then by the time I crashed, it took me about 10 times as long. I mean, a professor could explain the same thing 4 times to me and I still wouldn't get it.
wow.
Um, and that was
Did
the,
you go away from home to go to college?
I was in town. I actually got kicked out of my house at 17, and so was like living with
Mm,
mentors and friends.
mm,
And it really was, it was my mentor and then a couple of my closest friends that were my support through that. So, um, but again, they were learning through me, through my therapist, kind of what this experience was like.
mm,
So I had community. It was just kind of it was a chosen community.
mm,
And since then, there's been a lot of like repair and healing of my with my biological family and with my parents and siblings.
mm, mhm. Yeah. So you were getting support from friends and
Hmm.
you were seeing a therapist, uh, but uh, getting through school with those extremes must have been so hard.
It's
And
real tough, yeah.
what were you studying?
At the time, I switched my major quite a bit. I was studying intercultural studies and then went to like a digital arts program. And then by the, I think it was the second semester, I failed everything. Um, and again, because I was in a depressive like episode during finals week and just was like, this is too much. I know it, but I can't complete these finals.
Mm,
Dropped out. And then it took me like 3 years later, actually post healing, went back to school and majored in applied psychology. So my degree is now in psychology.
mm. Yeah. the dropping out,
Hmm.
uh, the to heal, um, or out of school. Well,
Hmm.
uh, the did you, you you didn't go back home. So
Right.
what was that chapter of your life like?
I was the time was just working at a restaurant. Have worked in a restaurant since I was like right out of high school, and so really just dove into trying to figure out like what I wanted to do with my life if school wasn't an option for me,
Mm,
and was like, man, well, maybe I'm just gonna kind of be a blue collar class individual and kind of work a like 9 to 5. Um, Tried that for a bit, didn't like that, and then just went back to the restaurant. Which again, when you struggle with bipolar and then you're around like alcohol, if you mix alcohol with your medication, at least in my experience, it pretty much canceled my medication out for the day.
mm,
So wherever I was at, just like jumped even higher to
mm,
mania or lower to depression. So that was a whole learning experience too of a
mm,
lot of trial and error, a lot of work with my therapist, and is this something I actually can do, or is working in an environment with alcohol around like just really unhealthy for me?
mm,
Um, and then I think it was about 2 years later. So it was like 6 years into my journey with bipolar. Got to a place where like I said, went to that inpatient psychiatric hospital. Um, and it was a few weeks after that that I received a healing, like supernatural healing, and then moved to Portland. So
mm,
there's really only a couple years of dropping out of school and kind of working a job, figuring out what life was going to be, to moving to Portland. And fairly quickly after being here and experience healing, um, started working at a teen rehab facility. It's an inpatient program um, that like specialized in dual diagnosis, um, and that's really where I got a lot of my hands-on kind of experience in being on the other side of this field, not just being a patient, but like learning what it meant to be more of a professional in this, and
mm,
became a group counselor there. Finished my degree while I was at this facility, and made some like really good friends with therapists and the psychologist there. And
mm,
that's where like kind of my love for mental illness started, was like, okay, I think because of my personal experience and now being healed from it, but also doing that work, I have a unique voice in speaking to individuals that have struggled with mental illness.
mhm. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more, Lauren, about um to anyone who might be struggling with bipolar, like you were
Yeah,
for those 6 years?
yeah. Ugh, um, man, you are probably one of the strongest people I know. The toll that it takes on your body and on your emotional health and your mental health,
Mm,
as someone that struggles with bipolar, man, it's no joke. And um, man, I just encourage you to like find community that don't just like stand by you, but that fight with you, and that recognize the lies that you believe about yourself in those moments of like depression. Um, and it's really, you're only going to be as strong as the community around you. And I know this year has been just absolutely
mm,
um, like devastating when it comes to community and what that means, because we can't even physically be around people right now, and that's kind of opening up a little bit. But like, man, find your people and find the people that are to fight with you. And if you don't have a therapist, like find one uh, that you can relate to. Finding therapists can be really hard. Finding someone that you like actually jive with is even harder. So don't give up. And if you do, honestly, if you need someone to give you a pep talk, like please do not hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram. I love having just conversations with people. So you're not alone at all. And man, it is such a like confusing, frustrating journey, but I promise it gets better. And the more tools you learn, it just makes it so much um, easier to manage those highs and those lows. But it's a grind, and if people tell you otherwise, like I'm sorry, because it is. You're totally justified in that.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Yeah.
Oh, I've 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 been following your Instagram, and your like
Hmm.
heart to like encourage and support people. Like it just really comes through. Like even it's through Instagram, like with you, like the questions that you ask.
Hmm.
But people, um, yeah, really engage with you. So like
Yeah.
Lauren's not just saying that. Like she does. She is there for people who are struggling. Um,
Yeah, and if just a piece on that, if you don't follow me on Instagram, we do. I try to do them a couple times a week, but on our story, the whole purpose of the story is just to check in with yourself through means of Instagram, which is silly. But man, if you struggle with mental illness, it's so easy to swipe through your feed or swipe through stories, and the purpose behind it is just to take a minute to stop and to focus on how you actually are doing. It's not a replacement of therapy, but man, it's so important to check in with ourselves and to actually be honest with where we're at. And so that's what Savon's talking about right now is that that piece of I just kind of walk you through questions, and you don't have to answer. If you answer on your own and it's too much, just share with me or this audience, then that's fine. But if you feel like you just need a piece of routine in your schedule and you're having a hard time finding it, that's all that story is just at your fingertips with this sometimes healthy, sometimes unhealthy coping mechanism of Instagram. Let's just take a minute
yeah.
and check in with where we're at.
I don't always respond, Lauren, but you've definitely slowed me down, and I've definitely found it helpful in the middle of busy days. So
Oh, thank
really
you.
appreciate that.
Myself
Um,
too. Sometimes I
mm,
do it just to just to check in with
oh,
myself.
totally. Um, now, uh, I know like healing
Hmm.
and miraculous healing. One, it can be very personal and private, and um, it can be hard to explain or share.
Yeah.
But I do want to. I am curious, um, and I want to open up the space for you to share more about it if you're comfortable. Um,
Yeah, I'd be happy to share some of it.
yeah, and if you can, like when you're supporting folks and talking to folks with bipolar, um, how do you like? Um, how do you talk to them um, when they're like, "Well, what about me? Like,
Yeah.
what about my healing?"
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very delicate space to and line to walk. Before I explain that, I would love to just explain my view of mental illness and how spirituality takes takes a role in that.
Yeah.
Like I briefly mentioned before, I've since high school I've seen spiritual warfare. Um, Again, not something that's fun to see when you're looking at a demon face to face, but um, through experiencing it and seeing it, have learned just so much about who the enemy is and how he likes to kind of reap havoc on especially individuals that struggle with mental illness. And so, my working theory of mental
Mm,
illness in the church as a Jesus follower is there's like real psychology, there's real chemical imbalance, there's real trauma and family of origin, there's real just unhealthy environments that can lead to a mental illness. That is not at all because of a sin that's hidden in your life or because you don't have enough faith to be healed from that mental illness. That is because your brain is just not getting some of the chemicals it needs, or it's been damaged by X, Y, and Z. Again, if that's you, find a therapist, find a professional that can like help to diagnose some of those struggles and can walk you through past patterns and things like that. The other side is that we are in a battle, and it's between like this good and evil of like Jesus and the enemy, and it's very real. And although we can't see it, it is all around us. And you would be stupid to say that the enemy never uses these like chains of like anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation. And if you're prone towards something like that, he is going to grab that chain and shake it as hard as he can. Again, he can't create anything. He uses like the same old tactics. I used to explain to some of my girls I mentored, like, hey, he is just this like wind up monkey that's just pounding you on the head with a hammer, and he can't move, and we just have to like step out from underneath it to recognize the like little power that the enemy has over us as Jesus followers. And so in explaining healing and explaining what we do at Speak Out, it is you have to understand both. You have to understand that like therapy and Jesus both coexist and are like incredible tools. We have to have both. And so in my healing, the first healing I did experience was that like hard work of I found a therapist that was like, these are patterns you're prone towards. These are lies you're prone towards believing. These are like thought patterns that are not healthy for you. These are lifestyle choices that you just have to choose to deal with the consequences of if you choose to do these things, or you can choose health for yourself, for your whole body. And it was through that hard work that I actually did experience healing. And it was through just like finding balance for myself, for my own body, for what I needed personally as like who Lauren Wilson is. And a lot of that was figuring out my personality, figuring out passions, figuring out even the life that I wanted to live. What were my like pastimes and hobbies, and what was all of that? All of that fed into
all those pieces that
all of it.
like
Yeah.
make you.
Yeah, like, and I had to just sit down and like actually like figure out like who am I and what do I need in this journey, and finding the right medication that worked for me and finding the right routines and practices did allow me to live like the most I hate the word normal, but the most like the most like normal life that I could, with a brain that was prone towards anxiety and mania and depression.
Healthy and stable.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
of those things are guardrails
Yeah.
for what your brain is trying to do
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And then it was about 3 months later I experienced healing again. I can see like spiritual warfare, and it was this whole story of this individual walking me through kind of these agreements, these bondages, these kind of contracts per se, that all metaphorically were made between like depression and me, and suicidal ideation and me. And this is where it gets into like spiritual realm space. But it was about a 3-hour process of just repeat after me speaking. We're called Speak Out PDX because I have experienced healing through speaking out. He literally would say, you need to like speak out forgiveness for all these people. And I just read a letter of relationships that I've had throughout my entire life, of forgiving all of these relationships, forgiving any sort of relationship that may have caused some sort of harm, emotionally or physically, and then kind of invited Jesus into the space and asked for him to command these things to leave, command bipolar, depression, and suicidal ideation to leave. And I saw all 3 of them come out of me. And then we spent just probably an hour um, then pouring things back into me. So speaking truth over my identity, speaking truth over my life, speaking truth over past experiences that were harmful
Mm,
or potentially could have caused some trauma. And like any addiction or like any thing that's bad, when you take it out, you have to put something good in replacement of that, right? You can't just leave something, like take something out and leave that void that it's is there. And so we just did that. It was a space of speaking out these lies that I believed and speaking out false identity over me.
mm,
um, so without going into a lot more of the um, theology kind of behind that, Jesus just met me and chose,
mm,
unbeknownst to anything really I did, just chose to heal me. um, i I am now very passionate about like not promising healing, because I've also been on that side of it of just begging God to heal me. I mean, those 6 years of being bipolar, I like several times a week would just be like screaming and angry towards the Lord of why I had to be the one that struggled with bipolar. Um,
mm,
and so I also deeply empathize with people in that space. And again, like I said, like we all will experience healing one day, whether it's on this earth or in heaven. and and whether or not Jesus chooses to heal like you or your friend, does not take a does not get to like take away whether or not you have enough faith or too much faith, or it's not a reflection of your relationship with Jesus and what he wants for you, because he does want full healing, but we live in a sinful world. And that's where like mental illness also kind of comes in play.
yeah.
um, so I don't know if that answers your question. Again,
No,
if you
that's
have way more questions about that, please reach out to me. I'd love to have conversations with people because there's a lot that goes into it. um,
right.
but
Right.
if you're listening and you're like, well, yeah, everyone can experience healing, absolutely. But promising healing when someone comes to you asking for prayer, or
Especially when they're suffering.
yeah, like
I've been
that is
suffering
not
for
the
years. Yeah.
yeah, that's not the space that they need to be met in. They need to be met with like really just sitting with them and just sitting in that space of suffering, sitting in that space of confusion and probably doubt with their faith, and then asking the Holy Spirit to come in and meet them, because that's where healing happens, is the Holy Spirit meeting them in that space, not because you said the right word or walked them through a certain prayer. But especially individuals that struggle with mental illness, we just, man, like we just need to be validated in how sometimes sucky life can be,
Mm,
and that we also are not flawed, that we have a place in the church, that we have a place in this like this family. And I really think that individuals struggling with bipolar or even schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, like man, their view of Jesus is one of the cool, coolest, most profound relationships, I think, because man, Jesus shows up for people in that space.
mm,
um,
yeah. I want to add religious OCD or scrupulosity to that list,
yes, yes.
because definitely that struggle, that disorder can distort uh, the, the real Jesus,
Yes.
and really mess things up and torment both. I love Lauren. Just I think we're both in agreement that it's not miraculous healing or Jesus or Holy Spirit or therapy. It's
Mhm.
both, and
Yeah.
and how God uses uh, those things, and uh, it, it can vary,
Yeah.
but I mean, we're both um, just acknowledging that there's a supernatural component to things,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
that I think people that struggle or suffer for a long time, especially if they've been wounded by the church, like give up hope or are just disillusioned and disappointed
Yeah.
at the idea like spiritual components or
Mhm.
pieces to healing,
Yeah.
because they've kind of been like kind of had that promise and it hasn't played out what they were hoping for or promised. And so yeah, like yeah, um be it thank you for sharing your story. I hope
Yeah.
will it will renew hope that are listening. So
Yeah.
let's shift gears a little bit. So
Good.
uh your experience with residential treatment and
Hmm.
leading groups. Uh, Tell me about the advent of Speak Out uh, Portland, and kind of what you're doing with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so we worked at the treatment center for 2.5 years, and just started kind of saw the same parallels of what I just shared with you about my story of kind of this like spiritual realm and just real like psychology, what's happening in our brains. And so quickly was like, man, I I really feel like my um my like kind of life purpose is to bring these conversations to the church, not in a not in like an angry, um like judgmental, forceful way, but in
Mhm.
um through conversation, through training, through education. So about 3 years ago, um, actually teamed up with someone I worked at that rehab facility with and was like, I want to start a nonprofit, and our goal is to educate the church. And that means a few different things. It means educate church leaders, pastors, youth leaders, admins, community leaders, people in leadership in the church on just the really basic like warning signs of mental illness and really easy tools of like, hey, you are, whether you like it or not, at the front lines of seeing these individuals, um, in their hurt and their pain. And when someone is struggling with a mental illness, if they can't afford therapy or they've never been to therapy, the church is one of the first places they go. And
Oh
so
yeah.
if we yeah, and so if we can like just educate just enough, um, for now these people in leadership to be able to like identify and then kind of help carry that struggle, from the church to a therapist or to a professional. That's really our whole goal through Speak Out. So
That's
um,
great.
I do a lot of I do a lot of speaking and sharing my story. I have mentored like really dozens of young women. Um, but our main goal is to equip the church and educate them. Um, and I think, especially this year, everyone is experiencing some sort of mental illness, to some capacity. And for a lot of people, it's something that they've never experienced before. I am just getting like just so many messages on Instagram of like, "Oh, I didn't realize this was anxiety. Oh, I didn't realize like I do think I am a little bit depressed."
Mm.
And so it's just bringing more awareness to what that actually looks like. And so we now have a team. We're rebuilding our whole board. We have a psychologist and a therapist. We're working on getting a pastor on our board, and then just a few like community members. And I just have my bachelor's, and so it's their responsibility to kind of give us the like thumbs up of everything that we present through trainings or through teachings. And so we really want to do this well. We don't want to be another organization that kind of tries without knowing what we're talking about. Because again, that's kind of where we have landed, um, is is because of things like that. But
Mm.
yeah, we want to be part of the change, and a lot of that is just sharing stories and helping to change the narrative for other individuals that are coming to the church, and we want what they're met with to be one of like love and understanding. And we talk a lot about approaching it with curiosity and not with fear. Mental illness can be super scary if you've never experienced it and someone's coming to you explaining things. And so we just teach that. How do you approach it with curiosity? How do you approach it with asking questions? How do you stay in your scope of practice? You're a pastor, you're a community
Mm,
leader, you're a youth leader, you're not a
mm,
therapist. We're not teaching therapists. Like, it's
right.
not therapy school. This is
Mm,
just teaching you the verbiage and the warning signs so that rather than acting in fear and potentially harming because of like a fear response, we're
yeah.
just approaching it with curiosity. It's
How,
like, wow, oh,
how do you support and get them to the next step with
yeah,
make it better without making it worse, or
yeah,
at least stabilize them. So like
yeah,
I've heard the expression like emotional or mental health for first aid, just
hmm,
knowing the basics,
yeah,
um, and especially youth pastors. Um,
hmm,
you know, very often uh, teens will talk to their youth pastor, um, or youth staff before they're even their parents, or and certainly a
yeah,
doctor
yeah,
or therapist. And so being comfortable with things like suicidal ideation, depression,
hmm,
anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, that's
yeah,
at least not getting overwhelmed and or freak out, um,
yes,
if someone opens up about those topics,
yeah,
is huge. I'm glad you're doing that training. Um, what's that been like during a pandemic? Like
yeah.
you're mentoring or your trainings.
Yeah, so we it's been really unfortunate. We had for probably 9 months kind of had to put a pause on in-person trainings, and kind of sat with like, man, how do I help just get these things these concepts, these tools to individuals in their homes when we're stuck at home. And so actually started a podcast called Speak Out Podcast. It's on all of the platforms, but I think there's about 12 episodes on that, and so we just kind of had to pivot like everyone else did, kind of take a look at what's our mission, what are we doing, what can we not do now, and then how do we pivot and keep moving forward. So
Mhm.
um, did a podcast and am now starting to ramp back up and kind of fill the next year with now trainings, which look very, very different because they all have COVID involved in them now. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, so it's been an adjustment, but I think like every business or every organization, we all have had to kind of adjust and move forward in a different way. So uh, with that and part of that, I also got my like life coaching certification. If you're unfamiliar with like life coaching and you're listening, kind of the main difference is therapists um, obviously have their masters. They have like all of these um, credentials for being able to diagnose an individual with a an actual disorder. They talk about the past. They talk about all things kind of past, and then how to change those patterns for your future. Life coaches are not equipped to talk about really any of that, but focus on the present and then focus on the future. So a lot of what I'm realizing with young adults and teens currently is that they don't really know how to move forward from here. Um, and kind of rebuild a healthy lifestyle. And so, a huge part of what we're passionate about, what I'm passionate about, is that as an eight, I love challenging people,
Mhm.
um, and love like mentoring and kind of being that gracious, tough love, and helping challenge people to a healthier space. And so that's what I've been doing in this last year is kind of focusing more on that and what that looks like to me. I know when we first started talking about this podcast, thought about becoming a counselor, and I think after this year, it totally has changed just my vision for what I actually want to do is speak out. And we have therapists and psychologists already.
Mhm. Mhm.
That specialize and have like years and years of experience in that. And so, um, yeah, we've again just looked over what we're offering and kind of pivoted, and I'm
Mhm.
excited to launch that in the next couple months. So I'll have a couple of spaces for um, for some like clients to come and work with me. Um,
Mm.
but
Nice. That you kind of looked at your team and
yeah,
then looked at your the needs, and then like
yeah,
just your superpower and who you are. Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. The so um, as we wind things down for
Hmm.
today, um, what are you hoping for in in this next year?
In this next year, man, I it's a big question. But I really think just for myself, for my community, for like Portland, or just our nation, and as a bigger picture. I really think this year has taught us what it means to slow down and taught us to like look at our priorities. Um, Whether you actively were aware of that or not, I think if you kind of take a look at this past year, um, we all have chosen what our priorities have been, and I think now looking forward, I think the church has just an incredible opportunity to meet people with community, meet people like genuinely just meet people where they're at, um, and we all kind of have a trauma bond of COVID together, and so there's there's this like just mutual love between every individual I see of like, oh, how are you? I'm good. How are you?
Mhm.
Because
I'm exhausted.
I'm
Yeah,
exhausted.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like,
Mhm.
but there is this trauma bond between everyone of like, man, we're in this together, and I'm so looking forward to just how um, the church shows up for people in that space, how community changes, what that looks like, and how we just encourage one another towards further healing and health in this next year. um, it kind of was a natural sifting out all of the bad and a lot of the good. But I think we all have kind of this like blank slate of figuring out who we are as individuals, who we are as Jesus followers,
Mhm.
and really what we want to do moving forward. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see that both in my personal community, but just as the bigger C church, kind of where we all land.
Mhm. I, that's a great vision, Lauren. I I I I am hopeful for that as well. I hope your podcast and your coaching and Speak Out Portland, um, yeah, will just continue to grow and that folk will uh, connect with it and utilize the resources and training to better support their friends and their people in their church communities. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll put your Instagram link and your website info there. Encourage listeners to connect with Lauren. Thank you again, Lauren, for coming on
Yeah,
today.
thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.